The Devils are in need of a goalie, I hear. Well, it seems like Connor Hellebuyck might be on the move from the Winnipeg Jets organization. Should the Devils pursue him, especially since he's going to become an unrestricted free agent in about a year? Is it worth the risk? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Silly season once more. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Ride for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. I figured it's been a while since I've done a silly season episode, so let's talk about Connor Hellebuyck and the possibility of the New Jersey Devils trading for him. So according to The Score, they recently put out an article and said that goaltender Connor Hellebuyck isn't interested in signing an extension with the Winnipeg Jets. According to The Athletic, Hellebuyck has one season remaining on his current contract of $6.16 million and is eligible to ink a new deal with Winnipeg as of July 1st, which is just a few weeks away. He's widely considered to be a top trade candidate this summer. Jets star center and restricted free agent Pierre-Luc Dubois also reportedly informed the franchise recently that he isn't willing to sign an extension and is seeking a move elsewhere. But obviously, that's a discussion for another time. So, Connor Hellebuyck, one of the greatest goalies of this generation, might be on the move, and a lot of fans have been pushing for Tom Fitzgerald to get another goalie. And as soon as the Stanley Cup Playoffs came to an end, people were just linking, saying, hey, let's go after Connor Hellebuyck. So in today's episode, we're going to focus on Hellebuyck as a player. We're going to talk about his background, what he would hypothetically provide towards the Devils organization. Then the second segment, we're going to get into the nit and grit of the discussion and talk about a potential trade package. And I'll also give my opinion as to whether or not I would personally make the deal. And then in the third and final segment, to wrap it all up, we're going to talk about how the Devils should approach the offseason going forward, because obviously we've shifted our focus over to Timo Meier and Jesper Bratt and their contract situations. But let's not kid ourselves. The Devils also need to fill out their roster just a tad bit more if they want to make it a little bit further in the playoffs come next year. So what would Hellebuyck hypothetically bring to the organization? Well, the stats speak for themselves. He appeared in 64 games. He had a record of 37, 25, and 2. He had a goals against average of 2.49 and a save percentage of .920. He won the Vezina Trophy back in 2020. He has been named to the All-Star team twice. He was named NHL's second All-Star team in 2018. He was named NHL first All-Star team in 2020. He has participated in 3 All-Star games. And like I said, he is one of the greatest goalies in this generation, because he not only led all goalies in games played this year, but he did it back during the 2020-2021 season. He did it back during the 2019-2020 season. He did it during the 2017-2018 season. He led the NHL in wins with 44 back in 2017-2018. Goals against, he led the entire league in that once more. 2021-2022, just last year, 2020-2021, 2018-2019. Shots against, he's led the league 4 times in that category. Saves 4 times. Shutouts once, 2019-2020. Minutes, he did it twice. Point shares, led the league once. And goalie point shares twice. According to David Satriano of NHL.com, he said that Hellebuyck faced the third most shots, 1,964, and made the second most saves, 1,807 this season. He had 6 games with at least 40 saves, going 5-0-1, and he led the NHL in shots against and saves in each of the previous 4 seasons. So I can go on and on about Connor Hellebuyck and his overall achievements, but like I said, his track history and his capabilities, they speak for themselves. He's 30 years of age, so he's getting up there a little bit, but I don't think he's slowing down anytime soon, because like I just said, he literally led all goalies in games played just this past year. And throughout the last 5 or so years, we've been seeing Connor Hellebuyck just put his name into a lot of high up rankings throughout the NHL amongst all active goalies in terms of like wins, shutouts, point shares, whatever the case might be. So Connor Hellebuyck is one of the best goalies in this generation. And I can see why fans are pushing for Tom Fitzgerald to possibly make another blockbuster deal, because let's talk about what Hellebuyck would bring to the roster if he was hypothetically added by the New Jersey Devils. So my thing is simply this. One of the big issues during the Stanley Cup playoffs was obviously the goaltending, because Vitek Vanecek, he completely crashed and burned once more. We saw his role diminish once again, because when he was with the Washington Capitals just last year, during the playoffs, he completely took a few steps backwards. It was completely different compared to his regular season that year as well, because once again, I always talk about how solid Vanecek is during the regular season, but come the playoffs, he tends to take a few steps backwards, and then the Devils had to put all their trust in a 22-year-old rookie, Kira Schmid, and he was able to shut out the New York Rangers not once, but twice in the first round. Then come the second series against the Carolina Hurricanes. He didn't put up his best performance, but at the same time, he was still way better than Vitek Vanecek. So obviously, a lot of people are saying like goaltending is still an issue for the Devils. Now, if Hellebuyck is added to the roster, he'll instantly become the starter. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. So we talked about some of the great achievements that Vanecek had just this past year. He was the first Devils goalie since Martin Brodeur to eclipse 30 wins. And Vanecek seemed to be very solid in between the pipes for the Devils. And not only that, I think the thing about Hellebuyck is that he not only does he bring great capability, but he brings great experience and can act as a mentor towards Vanecek and also Schmid just a little bit. Because one of the criteria I had for the Devils' pursuit of a goalie is that I wanted someone who had a good track history, but at the same time, somebody who can act as a mentor toward Mackenzie Blackwood, because obviously I was still projecting for Blackwood to be the go-to guy for the Devils come the new year. And obviously we know how that panned out, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that the Devils are still a relatively young team. You need someone like Hellebuyck added to your roster, because for Schmid, he's admitted that he sometimes gets nervous during big moments, and he's learned to channel it a little bit more, but he's still 22 years of age. He still has his career ahead of him. And then for Vanecek, it's just like, it seems like when the lights get brighter, it seems like he just diminishes just a little bit more, like he gets a little timid, because it's just so shocking that Vanecek is able to perform well during the regular season, but come the playoffs, he completely crashes and burns. And then having someone like Hellebuyck, obviously he would be the starter, but Vanecek and Schmid can utilize a lot of the lessons that Hellebuyck would hypothetically teach them, so that way they can take their games to the next level. And when Hellebuyck's time does come for him to step aside from the sport of hockey, I think you would definitely get a bright superstar in Schmid, because Schmid is starting to build up that track history, and his story arc in the NHL is amazing. Here's a guy who was brought up from Utica. He didn't have a good performance with the Devils last year, didn't leave a good first impression amongst the fan base, but this year he was vital as to why the Devils were able to go on a 13-game win streak, because Blackwood was out with that MCL sprain. And then come the end of the year, he was able to nudge his way into a backup role with the Devils come playoff time. Vanecek wasn't doing well in the first 2 games. And then lo and behold, here comes Schmid. But I think with Schmid and also Vanecek, their potential would just go through the roof if you were to add someone like Hellebuyck onto the roster. Now, obviously, that's the perspective I would see if I was like sitting in the Prudential Center, because every player needs some sort of mentor, and I think the Devils have been lacking that the last few years. They've tried with Jonathan Bernier, they've tried with Corey Crawford, but it didn't really help in that sort of way. But someone like Hellebuyck, someone who I don't see retiring anytime soon, but is still up there in age just a little bit more, can definitely provide that wisdom and experience towards such a young team like the Devils organization. So that's sort of the optic standpoint. But we're going to talk more about how this trade would pan out for the Devils, because this would be a hypothetical blockbuster deal. This would not be just a trade that falls under the radar. It's low risk, high reward. No, the Devils would be putting a lot of their trust in Connor Hellebuyck if they're willing to pursue him. But we're going to talk about that momentarily. Before we continue, let me tell you guys about eBay Motors. So for a championship team, it's all about making sure that every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits just right and the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know which part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is named the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And now with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get parts right, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Okay, so let's get into the nit and grit of this hypothetical trade scenario. So obviously I know a lot of fans are big on the Devils getting Connor Hellebuyck, and according to The Athletic, here's what they said in regard to maybe the Devils potentially making a trade for him. They said the Devils, like the Buffalo Sabres, can spend to acquire a high-end goalie. The cap situation may take a little bit more balancing because there are two key forward contracts, which is Timo Meier and Jesper Bratt, among a few other pending free agents to manage first. So one of those free agents that you have to manage is Erik Haula, because he was essential as to why the Devils were able to be so successful. Now, how would this hypothetical trade work? A lot of people are saying, why don't we just trade the rights to Jesper Bratt to the Winnipeg Jets and get Connor Hellebuyck? Well, that doesn't really make much sense now, does it? Because I'm going to talk more in great detail momentarily because I have a concrete example to use. But trading away Jesper Bratt for Connor Hellebuyck, look, I know Bratt is a headache and a half when it comes to these contract negotiations. Feels like we've been doing this same song dance routine for the past 3 or so years when trying to get him to extend with the Devils organization. But I think Bratt has a lot more mileage compared to Hellebuyck, and I just think that would be too big of a risk for the Devils to take. If I had to construct a trade package, because quite honestly, I think the Devils would lose any trade package that involves Connor Hellebuyck, because look at his contract situation. He's a pending unrestricted free agent, and he's going to demand for a lot more money, and I'll point that out momentarily. But the trade package that I guess I can best envision is that you trade the rights of Mackenzie Blackwood and maybe a prospect or two to try to entice the Winnipeg Jets, because if Pierre-Luc Dubois wants out, if Connor Hellebuyck wants out, seems like the Winnipeg Jets are heading straight toward a rebuild. So why don't you help them in that case by trading away some prospects that you're not going to need? And obviously you get Mackenzie Blackwood, not the oldest, but not the youngest either. Maybe needs a new change of scenery to try to get the best out of him. He still has a lot of upside, but I think he's hit a wall with the Devils organization. And quite honestly, I think the Devils have lost all patience with them. But even then, there's no way that the Jets would accept that trade. Just no way. Because like I said, Connor Hellebuyck, he's not a dime a dozen. He is once in a blue moon, because when it comes to goaltenders, and The Athletic pointed this out, there's not a lot of options out there for a team like the Devils, because one of the issues that the Devils had during the Stanley Cup playoff run, like I just mentioned, was goaltending. So you know that in order for the Devils to get over that hump, they're going to want to try to pursue a goalie or someone who is solid and dependable in net come playoff time, so that way the Devils can go a little bit further. So why would the Jets try to help out the Devils in that case? Because the Devils, one of their main Achilles heel is obviously goaltending. And if you just bail them out by giving them Hellebuyck for a low deal sort of circumstance, I don't know if the Jets would be able to live with themselves, even though they're in opposite conference. It's not like the Jets and Devils are rivals, but still, like when you see a team that can be so dominant, or a team that has potential to be dominant, why would you help them in that case? So my thing is simply this, which is I think it would be too big of a risk for the Devils to trade for Hellebuyck, because let's go back a few years. Let's look at another example in which the Devils traded away their 9th overall pick for Corey Schneider. Now, how did that turn out for the Devils, and how did that turn out for the Vancouver Canucks? Because the Canucks used that 9th overall selection to select Bo Horvat, and Horvat became their captain years later. just putting that out there. And what happened to Corey Schneider, I don't even think he's in the league anymore. He completely crashed and burned, and he was essentially just forced out of New Jersey, and we never saw the likes of Schneider ever again. And even though Horvat is not with the Canucks organization anymore, I think the Canucks won that trade because, like I said, Horvat gave them way more years, was their captain, and what happened with the goaltending situation for the Devils, it seemed like Corey Schneider could never get into a groove. He was injury prone. The Devils put all their trust in him, and it was sort of the same treatment that Blackwood is getting now. So it doesn't, and we've been talking about this over at Pucks and Pitchforks, it doesn't make sense for the Devils to trade a forward away for a goalie because let's think about this. Hellebuyck, he's 30 years of age, not the oldest, not the youngest. And how many more years could he provide for the Devils organization? Like realistically, anywhere from maybe 2 to 3 years. And that's a big risk because we need to figure out, like, are the Devils really ready to compete for a Stanley Cup? Are they ready to hoist that trophy up at the end? I feel like that's a deal you do when it's a win now circumstance, not when you're trying to build for something, because the Devils can take their time here. Their window is not closing. If anything, Tom Fitzgerald has also said this, their window is just opening. So if you trade away Jesper Bratt, because I think Bratt's mileage and his production could go way further compared to Hellebuyck. Am I saying that he'll surpass Hellebuyck in terms of greatness? No. But think about what you need at this point, and do you really want to break the bank in that regard? So that's a huge risk right there. And I don't think the Devils would hypothetically win any trade circumstance because I literally just said Hellebuyck is set to become an unrestricted free agent. And if you don't believe me, Christy Flannery recently released an article in regard to the hypothetical trade circumstance. And she said Hellebuyck would come with a cap hit of $6.17 million next season. After that, he will be an unrestricted free agent. And some are projecting for his contract would have an average annual value of $9 million or higher. So there we go right there. We've been talking about the last few weeks that money is a bit of an issue for the Devils because you got to focus on Timo Meier, and then obviously you got to focus on Jesper Bratt. I think Bratt can go a lot further in terms of more years added to his career compared to Hellebuyck. So once again, if the Devils were in a must-win scenario, if their window was closing, by all means, go for Hellebuyck because you need to win a Stanley Cup now. Otherwise, you're going to lose some key players, you're going to lose some key assets, and you're going to have to start over, and you're going to have nothing to show for it. But that's not the case for the Devils. Jack Hughes is signed long-term. Nico Hischier is signed long-term, and they haven't even entered their primes yet. So there's your two centerpieces to rebuild around. And when looking at the goalie situation, I get that the Stanley Cup playoffs was a bit of a disappointment. Both goalie, or I guess Vanecek in this case, was abysmal. And then for Schmid, he had a great first series, and then the second series a bit iffy, but still, I think he held down the fort for what he could do at his age and experience. You still have two good goalies. I'm not giving up on Vanecek. 30 wins don't just happen, guys. It doesn't just happen out of thin air. And then for Schmid, it's just like he has a lot of upside. He has a lot of potential. And I'm not saying that the Devils shouldn't go after a goalie. It just doesn't make sense to trade for Hellebuyck. And once again, we've been talking about this over at Pucks and Pitchforks, which is it's usually a huge risk to trade a forward away or a high-end prospect for someone like Hellebuyck, who quite honestly would probably be used as a rental type of player because I don't know if the Devils will be willing to break the bank for Hellebuyck in this case. This seems like a deal that's better on paper, and I'm not trying to diminish Hellebuyck because I literally said in the first segment what he was able to do the last few years in the NHL, but he's 30 years of age. The last time the Devils pursued goalies who were like, in their 30s, you would have to look at like Corey Crawford. How did that turn out? Jonathan Bernier, how did that turn out? And once again, when the Devils traded away their 9th overall selection in favor of Corey Schneider, how did that turn out for the Devils? How did that turn out for the Vancouver Canucks? Obviously, Schneider's not with the Devils anymore. Horvat is not with the Canucks anymore. But I think the Canucks won that deal. And I think in your heart-to-heart, you know that as well. So it just wouldn't make sense for the Devils to trade for Hellebuyck in this case. Very good player, but I just think you would be trading for a rental. It would be too big of a risk, not a smart investment. and the Devils would have to break the bank when it's time to pay him because he's not going to be an RFA. He's going to be a UFA. So there's the risk right there. And I know there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to pounce on the opportunity to try to sign Hellebuyck onto their organization. Okay, so the main question is, do the Devils need a goalie? Because I've been talking about it the last couple segments, which is Vitek Vanecek is this, Akira Schmid is this, but they weren't able to do this. They weren't able to do that. Do they need a goalie? I would say yes. Okay, so I know The Athletic recently, once again, released an article and said that the free agency market for the Devils to try to pursue after a goalie doesn't really look to be in their favor because obviously you might get someone like Jonathan Quick. I think Frederick Anderson is also available via the free agent market, and a couple other players that quite honestly most likely are just going to stick with the team that they're already on and are just waiting for a new deal. So obviously that's not going to work into the Devils' favor. And I get that goalies are not a dime a dozen. Like I said in the first segment, they're once in a blue moon because everyone needs a successful goalie in order to make it to the next level, because you can survive with a bad defense but good goaltending. But if you have solid defense and horrendous goaltending, that's usually a recipe for disaster. So my thing is, like, I think the Devils should go after a goalie, but it should be a low risk, high reward type of circumstance, because that's how they got Vitek Vanecek. They just traded away a couple draft picks, and they weren't first round draft picks for Vanecek's service. He was a restricted free agent, and the Devils were able to negotiate a few year extension with Vanecek. And I think Vanecek still can provide a lot to the organization. It's just a matter of how is he going to perform during the playoffs. I know these last couple seasons have not played into his favor. And now you can shift your focus. Once again, if you're not comfortable with Vanecek being the starter next year, I think you could shift your focus back over to Akira, because Akira is a very tall goalie. Seems like he has a lot of upside, a lot of potential. He's only 22 years of age. He has his whole career in front of him. I don't project for him to take any steps backwards. And if you guys remember, he left a bad taste in the mouth of many Devils fans when he made his NHL debut during the 2021-2022 season. And talk about a complete 360, because I thought Nico Dawes would be that goalie that they called up from Utica. And by the way, speedy recovery to Dawes. But yeah, that's my thing, which is the Devils need to go for a low risk, high reward type of goalie. Look for like another trade circumstance that would go into their favor, because you don't want to break the bank here, because it's not just Timo Meier. It's not just Jesper Bratt. You got to focus on a couple other players that you're going to have to re-sign within a year or two, because obviously you got someone like Dawson Mercer. He only has 1 year left on his entry-level contract, so you got to focus on him. Luke Hughes and soon Shimon the Mets, whenever he signs his entry-level contract, you're going to have to focus on them when their contracts expire in a few years. So my thing is, you already have a decent amount of players signed long-term. You're trying to focus on Timo Meier. Jesper Bratt, I don't know what the case is for him, but it seems like he's looking for a short-term deal at this point. Can't really confirm that. That's just a theory. And then for Hellebuyck, Christy Flannery literally said it in one of her recent articles for the Hockey News, which is he might demand a new contract annually of $9 million. So to give you reference, he would be paid around the same ballpark as Dougie Hamilton. He would be paid more than Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes and possibly Timo Meier. So are you willing to pay that much for a goalie, which hypothetically, how many more years can Connor Hellebuyck give us of solid contribution in between the pipes? And I just don't think that's a move you make if you're the Devils, because you already got something special going. Don't get greedy. Don't break the bank, and just trust the process and just look for your options right there. But I haven't given up in Vanecek or Schmidt. And I'll talk about this in a future episode. I think both of them have a lot of upside. And yes, the playoffs didn't really go all that well, but I still think there's nowhere for them to go but up. And for Vanecek, we kind of saw it during the regular season when sometimes he was inconsistent. I think the thing that Vanecek is going to work on is just, he's got to work on the consistency, especially to end the regular season, because we saw it happening. At least I saw it happening at what month was it? March, when Vanecek was going on a bit of a cold stretch. And that was just about a month away from playoffs. So take that in consideration. So my thing is Connor Hellebuyck, very good player. I would love to have him to the roster, but I just don't think the Devils will be able to afford him. And I don't think the investment of trading away someone like Jesper Bratt or another prospect or whatever the case might be, I just don't think it would be a smart return for Tom Fitzgerald because Connor Hellebuyck, what if he gives us one good year and then the rest are just like mediocre kind of thing? I don't think that which is not that hard of a theory to basically ponder upon because we've seen it happen with the Devils organization before and it's already bit him in the butt once. Let's not get burned again. So let me know what you guys think. Do you want to see Connor Hellebuyck added to the roster? Who would you trade him for? And if it's not Hellebuyck, which goalie would you like to see the Devils pursue? Curious to hear your guys' thoughts. So leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal Twitter page at TreyMatt4 or the show's Twitter page at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.